The study found greenhouse gas emissions are warming the oceans 40% faster than even the dire predictions made by the UN's top climate scientists 5 years ago.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. We start with one of several short clips from Democracy Now!
In environmental news, newly released data shows carbon dioxide emissions in the U.S. increased by 3.4% in 2018, the largest increase in 8 years. The spike comes despite a large number of coal plants closing in the past year. Researchers say the increase can be attributed to a rise in emissions from transportation, buildings, and factories. Last month, scientists said carbon dioxide emissions surged globally in 2018, describing the alarming trend as a speeding freight train.
That's understated. UN scientists say we must cut carbon emissions by 2030 almost in half. That's the long bar going down. Instead, last year, we increased emissions. Then, a couple days later,
in climate news, a major new study published in the journal Science finds the world's oceans are absorbing heat at a far faster rate than previously predicted, a finding with troubling implications for the future of life on Earth. The study found greenhouse gas emissions are warming the oceans 40% faster than even the dire predictions made by the UN's top climate scientists 5 years ago. The authors write, quote, "This warming has contributed to increases in rainfall intensity, rising sea levels, the destruction of coral reefs, declining ocean oxygen levels, and declines in ice sheets, glaciers, and ice caps in the polar regions."
So if you thought climate problems weren't coming for 20 or 30 years, think again. This is an emergency, not the racist hoax at the border.
In Sudan, anti-government protests over the past month have resulted in at least 800 arrests, according to government officials. Among the arrested were professors from Khartoum University who joined the popular uprising. Dozens were killed during violent clashes last month as people took to the streets protesting the economic situation of the country and the military regime of President Omar Hassan al-Bashir, with many calling for the overthrow of the ruling National Congress Party. Al-Bashir is also accused of trying to censor news about the ongoing protests by arresting journalists, shutting down newspapers and websites, and disrupting the internet.
The Sudanese city of Omdurman saw its biggest protest yet on January 9th. One estimate was 20,000 people in the streets. Shaki Ishak, 12 years old, shot to death. A young man shot in the leg, helped by friends. These two men were killed by soldiers. Here, a family is tear-gassed as they try to take home the body of Salah, who was shot dead with 2 bullets. To prevent soldiers from entering hospitals and abusing the wounded, crowds gathered around medical facilities. Interestingly enough, it is trade unions that are taking a major role in the uprising in Sudan. These include teachers, doctors, and pharmacist unions. Read about it on rpm.world. In Saudi Arabia, a good ending to a terrible story. A young woman on a family visit to Kuwait publicly said she was leaving the Muslim religion. Outrageously, in Saudi Arabia, this can get you the death penalty. She took off for Australia, but only got as far as Thailand. She started tweeting, and Saudi friends of the Egyptian feminist Mona El-Tawe got in touch with her and told about the situation. She alerted her considerable following while the 18-year-old Saudi barricaded herself in a hotel room in Bangkok and tweeted furiously. In the end, the UN declared a political refugee, and it looks like Canada will take her in. See more about this situation on SaudiUS.org, including a link to a rather salty, passionate rant by Mona El-Tawe, which includes a call to free all Saudi feminists who are in the Saudi dungeons. In West Haven, Connecticut, the University of New Haven has ignored international attention about its scandalous links to a Saudi police college. Our Middle East Crisis Committee has taken out this ad to ask the local city council to take a stand. If you want to learn more, contact us at mail@thestruggle.org. The protest against the devastation of Yemen that we talked about last week continued on in Union Square, New York City on Saturday. These great souls stood in the rain. Local Jewish nationalist extremists in Birmingham, Alabama, told a civil rights group there to cancel its award to Angela Davis. Incredibly, the group did cancel.
Civil rights leader Angela Davis has responded to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's decision to revoke a human rights award in her honor over her activism for Palestinian rights and criticism of Israel. Davis says she was stunned by the move. In a statement, she responded, "The rescinding of this invitation and the cancellation of the event where I was scheduled to speak was not primarily an attack against me, but rather against the very spirit of the indivisibility of justice," she said. Davis will instead appear at an alternative event in Birmingham.
Happily, this has led to a huge backlash in favor of Angela Davis and free publicity for the noble cause of BDS. For more information, watch the January 11th program of Democracy Now! We now have our first score of signers on the open letter calling on trade unions to defend the Texas teacher fired for refusing to sign an anti-BDS pledge. We're looking for people from unions and residents of Texas to be the first signers. Boycotts are basic tools of unions whenever there's a strike or major dispute. You'd think Trumka and company would be the first to raise their voices. Well, they have to be convinced. To sign on, go to our website, thestruggle.org, and look at headlines. Iran. These three are Iranian environmentalists who are in prison, some of the many jailed by the regime in solidarity. That from the Facebook page, Iran Protests Live Information. Some thoughts about the government shutdown, or Trump down, as I like to call it. This is a pay stub of an air traffic controller. And a friend of ours in Oakland carried around a sign on a rainy day calling on people to stop being passive. This meme tells it all. Trump wants to take away emergency funds destined for a ravaged Puerto Rico and build a useless wall. And now the conclusion of the talk by Jason Stanley about his book, How Fascism Works.
Nostalgia for a past that never was. A nostalgic, pure ethnic past. And then you can get them to be furious at the people who've taken it away. Chapter 2 is called Propaganda. There's a number of things that surprised me when I was doing this research. One thing that surprised me, I was reading Kate Mann's excellent book, Down Girl, and she talks about how, when men run against women for political office, they run anti-corruption campaigns. I heard this happened in this country. And she talks about Australia, a similar case in Australia. And she says it has to do with the fact that what anti-corruption there means is that the ordinary order is being corrupted. And then I was reading literature on National Socialism, and like Richard Grunberger in his 1975 book, he says, it's funny, everybody thinks that the Nazis were like these pure anti-Semites who were deeply, purely devoted to killing Jews, but in fact, most of them didn't care at all about killing Jews. They cared a lot about Jewish art and Jewish property and Jewish gold and Jewish money, and they really just didn't care at all about killing Jews. It's not that they hated Jews, it's not that they didn't hate Jews, it's that they were just thugs and criminals and mobsters. That was the majority of the Nazi Party. And he says, and it's weird because people don't think of them that way. People think of them as like dedicated, but they weren't. They were just, most of them were just thugs who wanted money. He said they were totally corrupt and yet they ran an anti-corruption campaign. Putin, 2011, who's Putin, nice guy, I'm sure. But Putin, that joke doesn't work in Ukraine. It's like, even when I added it's a joke, there was not even. Putin, 2011 campaign, an anti-corruption campaign. Putin himself has very little money, but I think both his daughters have several $1 billion in the bank from their jobs. And many of his friends do as well. So Putin runs anti-corruption campaigns, and it looks like, and then you look at our own country, and W.B. Du Bois's book, Black Reconstruction, which is, I think, maybe the most essential book to read, that and Arendt's Origins. But don't buy this book, buy Du Bois's Black Reconstruction. Sorry, my publishers hate it when I do that. Buy both. This is shorter. But in Black Reconstruction, Du Bois talks about how Reconstruction ends, supposedly because black majority areas are corrupt. And Du Bois deeply researches this and says, no, they weren't. They're much less corrupt. What did corruption mean? He says corruption meant that 4 million black Americans could vote. That's what corruption meant. And then you look and you think about, just inspect, if you're white like me, inspect your ordinary cultural intuitions about what a corrupt American city looks like. it looks like it's run by ethnic groups, right? That's what we're told, right? The Irish, the Italian, black, in the Midwest, Michigan's Emergency Manager Act they took the 6 black majority cities and they said they're all corrupt. We're going to replace them by emergency managers we're going to fire the city council, fire the mayors. Of course, Flint, Michigan happens. You know, that's anti-corruption for you. Take an $80 million bond out and poison the city. So corruption in fascist politics means the wrong people are ruling. And you can think about it like this. In fascist politics, you destroy truth, you destroy competence, you represent all politics as us versus them. So the idea is, like, if they're ruling, they're handing out the goodies. We should be handing out the goodies. So Arendt says that fascist politics resembles a mafia family because it's based on power and loyalty. You know that you're in a fascist moment when the leader puts their family members or their business cronies into positions of administrative power, because then they're running things like a mafia. So because it's power and loyalty. So other chapters are hierarchy. Hierarchy is another way to destroy truth, because we all pretty much suck to the same degree. So it's a lie that some of us are better than others. So you get people used to that lie. You get people used to a politics of myth, and you get them comfortable in a politics of myth, and you take them away from truth. You get them to not care about truth. They just care about, they're comfortable with this myth of superiority. They're comfortable with us versus them, with everything being that. Victimhood. So they talk about, so the idea there in fascist politics, the dominant group are history's greatest victims. Serbian Academy's 1986 memorandum talks about how the Serbian people are the greatest victims, most persecuted group in human history. Hitler just is, Mein Kampf is a dirge to German suffering after Versailles, and ethnic German suffering in other countries. The dominant group is a victim of encroaching equality, of feminists, of minority groups. They're victims of these groups. And what are the characteristics of these groups that are lower down in the hierarchy? Well, they're criminals. So law and order is another chapter, the next chapter. The outgroup men are criminals. The outgroup men are just, and what crime do they do? Rape. All over. So the Rohingya, if you look at Myanmar, in 2012, 3 Rohingya men raped a Rakhine woman. All the Rohingya are then accused of being rapists, placed in a couple hundred villages, and vicious propaganda is directed against them for 5 years. And then mass atrocities are visited upon them, centrally murder and rape. But nobody considers it. Like the idea that the Rohingya women are suffering from mass rape is not even something that occurs to people, and you still find them saying the Rohingya are rapists. It's the outgroup. Tim Snyder made this point the other night. Like, rape is only a crime that can be visited on the in-group. And then all this politics is harshly anti-gay. Fascist politics is harshly anti-gay. Look at Eastern Europe right now. Look at the Nazi Germany. All fascist politics. Look at Bolsonaro in Brazil, who said, "I'd rather have a dead son than a gay son. I'd rather have my son die in an accident than on the way home than come home with a man with a mustache." Fascist politics is harshly anti-gay because it reinforces patriarchal politics. Sexual freedom is a kind of freedom, and you want to hammer freedom and replace it with authority and tradition. And chapter 9 is Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, the values of the heartland. You know, the social basis of fascist movements is almost invariably, not universally, comes from the rural areas, and certainly the politics works that way. Chapter 2 of Mein Kampf is called My Time in Vienna, and it comes to Vienna and its decadence and foreigners and Jews and more Jews. In Europe, in Romania, Jews are only allowed to own property in the city. So Jews get associated with the city. The outgroup, you know, the cities are the places where there's mixtures between the outgroup men and the in-group. And then I noticed in my country, the expression inner city means something. It means the place, not where Jews live, well, okay, also Jews, but minority groups live, right? So it's always and chapter 10, the final chapter is called Arbeit macht frei, and I owe the title to Tim Snyder, who said to me once, he said, you know, when white people in America, that means work shall make you free. It was on the gates of Auschwitz. And Tim Snyder said to me, you know, when white Americans say black people are lazy, what they mean is what the Nazis meant by that. The outgroup, they're criminal and they're lazy. That's how you characterize them. The Jews were lazy. Again and again, I've sat in Sterling Library with education textbooks that show, you know, pictures of Jewish hands, allegedly Jewish hands, soft Jewish hands. Haven't worked. So you have to make them work for free. You make the outgroup work for free to give them a work ethic, and that's the way to make them free. And at the basis of fascist ideology is social Darwinism. It's about winning. It's about the group on the top works harder, and they're the hard workers, they're the law-abiding hard workers, and the out-group are the criminal, lazy ones. I'm going to end there and take questions. Thank you. So the excellent question is, aren't corporations fascist? To which the answer is yes. I discuss, I'm looking in chapter 10 for my lengthy quotes from Hitler's speech to the industrialists in 1933, the Dusseldorf industrialists, where he makes this point. He says to the corporations, he says to the industrialists, who are essentially CEOs, he says, you run your companies according to the leadership principle. How can you tolerate a state run as a democracy? If a state is run as a democracy, there will be regulations that constrain your leaders. He said, and he says, I won't allow there to be the people to have regulations that constrain you. I will run the state according to the leadership principle, and I will leave you alone to run your fiefdoms according to the leadership principle. Elizabeth Anderson's new book, Private Government, which I also discuss in this chapter, is really good here when she talks about what does it mean to have a democracy when everyone spends most of their time in private business, which is run anti-democratically. I mean, these are points that we know from the leading political philosophers of the last 200 years. Jane Addams's great classic essay, A Modern Lear, is about this, where she says, it's about the Pullman written to George Pullman, and who thrashes back at the Pullman strikers because he feels they're ungrateful. And she says, it's a democracy. Like, it's not about gratitude. They're your equals. Like, and that great work of democratic political philosophy, one of the great essays of the last 150 years, is an argument for that democracy requires democratic workplaces. Similarly, the last 2 pages of Du Bois's Of the Ruling of Men is making this point. Democracy requires democratic workplaces. Hitler flips the script. in my classes, I teach those 3 essays together. I teach Hitler's speech to the industrialists, and I teach Jane Addams' Making of a Modern Leader, and Du Bois's Of the Ruling of Men in like 2 to 3 classes. They're all making the same point. Hitler's saying, yeah, you can't have private workplaces and democracy, so you need to have fascism. You need to have, and Jane Addams and Du Bois are saying you can't have private workplaces and democracy, so you need democratic workplaces. They're all making the same point. So you had as I say in chapter 10, I say when people say they want a CEO for president, they're responding to their inner fascist. So the time in the United States when we were closest to fascism was 1900 to 1920, 1900 to 1930. The first time you have people running, Reader's Digest starts a series in 1904, Reader's Digest. That's where Lindbergh did. There's a lot of fascist stuff in Reader's Digest. 1905, I think, is the first of a series of articles that presents the CEO and the businessman as like the ideal community leader. And so it's the beginning of like representing, because what happens in a corporation, in a democracy, think of de Tocqueville's description of us, you know, we all, America, everyone is an officer of some organization. You know, everyone wants to run things. Everyone is participating in the running of their own society. But you get in the early 20th century, this move to, hand over the power to a strong CEO who will do it all for you. And yeah, so absolutely.
And just a few minutes ago, we found there'll be a major anti-fascist demonstration in New York City in March, on the day the UN designates as the World Day to Combat Racism. We'll keep you in touch and informed. That's our program for today. I'm Stanley Heller. Thanks for watching.